What's up, YouTube? Capital G here. So talking about Apoqliphort Towers in this video and asking the question, what would you have Konami do with this card and its clones? When I say its clones, you guys know the cards that I'm talking about. I'm talking about the cards that are essentially the unkillables, the monsters that Konami saw fit to build in to the effect of those monsters. These monsters are unaffected by all other effects. Now, I do understand that somebody's going to point out Great Magnus is affected by super quantum effects, but I mean, let's be real, like 99.99% of the time, that shit is like not relevant at all. So I'm talking about these monsters that essentially you summon them and you win the duel. Do you think that they should just not be a part of Yu-Gi-Oh? Do you think that they should all get the axe, or do you think that, I guess if you're on the other side of the argument, then you probably have to argue that Towers should be unbanned, because from a fundamental standpoint, it doesn't really make sense that these two cards are legal. Some people would even argue that they're superior to the original Apoqliphort Towers, and yet they're actually unbanned. This card, again, not out in the TCG yet, but it will be in May. Now, this is a video that it's been long coming. I actually had been thinking about making this video ever since we learned about, the Ultimate Rory Falcon, but I wasn't sure if these decks were going to have the same impact as something like Apoqliphort Towers, because you saw when people realized how good Towers were, they started building full decks around, just one card essentially, because they started realizing like, hey, if we summon Towers, there's only maybe 3 or 4 outs in the meta that people play. Like, let's just summon this and pretty much win the duel. And when you get these decks to, I think at ARG, Richmond, Kelvin Tahan said that he had his deck somewhere at like 88% or something like that, going first of summoning Great Magnus. Now the thing is, I've always said in the past that for me to want to invest a lot in a boss monster, I want my boss monster to pay me a lot back. I've always said that. I'm always like, if you're going to make me jump through hoops and do backflips and handstands, I want that monster to pay me back. Like, one of the best examples is something like Shooting Quasar Dragon. Shooting Quasar Dragon is, it is a card that you literally have to build an entire deck around to summon. There are archetypes that people play decks of, but they're kind of just disguised as like Quasar decks. I'm talking about like Lavals and Fables. They're really just like, summon a Quasar and pretty much just win at that point. If they've got Soul Charge, maybe even make a double Quasar or something like that. And then there are other decks that are like hybrids, like Junk Doppel, Quick Draw, Doppel Warrior, and stuff like that. But Quasar is a perfect example of a deck that, of a card that takes a ton of investment. You have to use 3 synchros to summon one monster. But at the same time, it's a card that can single-handedly win you the duel. It can just attack for game. It can get multiple attacks at 4,000. 2 attacks is game, unless you use like upstarts or something like that. It can negate anything that your opponent throws at it, outside of like spell speed 3s and the what I like to call spell speed 4s, like super poly cards you can't respond to no matter what. Outside of things like that, Quasar negates everything. And then even if Quasar dies, I believe it gets a Shooting Star Dragon. It's been a while since I've seen Quasar. When Quasar dies, it does give you another not equally, but it gives you another really powerful monster to say, you know what? Your Quasar was on the field. It happened to die. Here's something just as powerful to summon. So Quasar gives you a lot back for what you invest. Something like Crystal Wing Synchro Dragon is something I would say like a new age Quasar. When this card comes out in Shiny Victories, oh my god. This is something that, again, like, gets extremely powerful. It can negate any monster effect, and it's definitely worthy of what you put in. But I feel like with these monsters, with the unkillables, you get way too much back, because in a sense, once you summon them, you don't have to play the Protect the Stardust type deal. I'm perfectly fine with Protect the Stardust, which is just it's just a term that people use for protecting a big boss monster that you put on field. Usually those monsters have a level of protection or some type of negation, like Stardust Dragon or Great Show, Legendary Six Samurai Xian or whatnot. I'm perfectly fine with that, but when you summon these cards, you don't really have to protect them because they're unaffected by everything. Now, everything in Yu-Gi-Oh, to my knowledge, is killable, other than, I guess, like the Exodia 5 pieces. If you have them in your hand, that's not the same thing. But every monster in the game is essentially killable, but it's like you have to look at, you know, how practical it is to actually out these cards. And now that these cards or these decks have shown that they can actually succeed on the highest level of play, yes, they haven't won a YCS yet, but I'm thinking winning like an ARG makes the decks very relevant. You know, you have to look at what actually outs these type of cards and how practical they are, like how much of the meta actually runs. Now, for me, I think that there's three ways that people generally out these cards. Number one is to make your monster bigger than to make your monster actually raise its attack or its stats to become. Generally, you need to get to about 30 to kill the monster and run it over and keep your monster. You generally need to be around, I say, 36 to 3700 attack, but 35 will sometimes get the job done. And there are certain ways that, you know, decks can do that with things like Honest, the battle phase tricks, as I like to call them, Jurigato, etc. You can also use searchable ways of increasing your monster's attacks. Decks like Mermill and Monarchs, they do have things that can boost their attacks, like Domain and, you know, like Michizuchi and whatnot. They can search these. The second way is to summon a monster that's bigger than this. This is extremely unlikely. It's far less likely than the first way, because even 15 years into Yu-Gi-Oh, you know, despite what the show may had us believe what Yu-Gi-Oh might become, where, you know, Kaiba is summoning Ultimate Blue Eyes Dragon, like that never came to fruition in competitive play. We're still not at the point where we commonly summon monsters with like 4,000 attack. Like, it just really doesn't happen. The closest thing we ever really got to is, you know, like Demise OTK, or, you know, summoning a 5-head off of like Future Fusion and stuff like that. But it's kind of just gimmicky plays or gimmicky decks. We're still really not at the point where we summon monsters that are higher than this. So that's really not going to happen. And then the third is simply to tribute the monster. Just about everything in the game outside of like Fog King and stuff can be tributed. This is probably less likely than the first two. Like, this one is just not gonna happen as far as main deck play, and it's because we don't really entertain this mechanic. Not in the main deck. You don't have people playing like the kaijus or lava golems in the main decks of decks unless they're playing kaijus or they're playing a burn deck and stuff like that. In Japan, it's even worse because they don't even have the kaiju. So they've pretty much, anytime that they've had to crack really big boards that have like a whole bunch of stunny type monsters, they've always used lava golem against like heroes where it's like, you know, got the Rafflesia, got the Dark Law turn 1, okay, Lava Golem. You know, you're playing against like Pepe, you've got the Cyber Infinity, you got that Nat Beast turn 1, Lava Golem. But, you know, these are cards that you will never really run in the main deck, and even when you do side them in against these decks, to my knowledge, they're not searchable. Unless you're summoning, or unless you're, you know, playing like you're siding in 3 turtles, and then maybe you're gonna side in like a waterfront. I don't know what sense that makes, but these cards are definitely not searchable. So I know everybody will be like, oh, Cap, why don't you just side in some kaijus? That's fine, but if you don't draw them against these monsters, then what do you do? Because they're not searchable. So, you know what I mean? And the thing is, when I look at this argument for and against, I think it's weird because it seems like Konami in the TCG doesn't even like the existence of these cards. I know it's kind of funny that they have to, you know, keep printing them because that's what the people who make Yu-Gi-Oh are essentially releasing. But I think that they don't like I don't think they like the concept of the unkillable monster. If you look at the Yu-Gi-Oh TV show again, I always feel like, you know, Konami tries to mold the game, trying to at least mirror what the TV show is. You know, the Yu-Gi-Oh show was about summoning a whole bunch of monsters and battling each other, but it's kind of futile if your opponent summons one huge monster that you literally can't kill. I mean, even on the show, when Kaiba summoned the Ultimate Blue Eyes White Dragon, it's like 4,500 attack, or, you know, when they went into like the little digital world, dude had a 5,000 attack 5-headed dragon, and those things got taken down. You know, they got taken down by either monsters that gain attack or savviness or something like that. You know, and I think that Konami wants the game to be like that. I don't think they want monsters in the game where when your opponent summons it, you pretty much just pass, set, you know, or just automatically scoop. That's why you can even look at something like Jin and Colossalus and why this card got outright banned. I mean, look at all the things that Konami could have done to Necroz, and the only card that actually got banned was Jin, because Jin generally created a game state where, like, your opponent just had one monster on the board, or one monster that just stopped your opponent or stopped their opponent from playing. And I think Konami looked at that and they were like, this is boring and we definitely don't want that. So that's why I look at these and I'm just like, well, wouldn't it make sense essentially to ban these cards outright too? And I feel like Konami, at least in the TCG, they may be up against it because, you know, obviously they're not going to ban this card before it's released. They want to make money off of this. And then at the same time, you know, this set was just released, so you know they want to sell this, they want to promote it, they want to make money off of this. Now a lot of people are going to talk about Utopia the Lightning and they're going to be like, well, cap it out to all of those, why didn't you mention it? The thing about Utopia the Lightning, yes, it is kind of like the Diamond Crab King for Towers or whatever, but at the same time, do understand that this card is not playable in Europe. So I guess for like a good portion of the TCG, like you can't even use this as an out. So you know what I mean, like all the events that happen, like Euros and the UK Nationals and stuff like that, if somebody summons, you know, Ultimate Falcon, like they can't look at this card and be like, dang, I can totally summon this and out it, because it's not legal over there. So not sure how fair it is to really even mention this as far as the arguments. But what do you guys think? Should these cards exist in the game where you summon them? Yes, you have to put in a decent amount of work. With Towers, it was 3 tributes. With you know, the Super Quantum Magnus, you essentially have to give up 3 monsters. With Ultimate Falcon, I think this one is just like, what? I mean, Ultimate Falcon is a 2-card combo. You just summon Lastrix and then just skip them to, you just skip force them up to Ultimate Rory and bam, like it's a 2-card combo. And I've seen people play decks that are literally just summon, or literally just they focus around summoning this one card. Honestly, I think that they should be banned, because it doesn't make sense for Towers to be banned as an unkillable wall that people can't, you know, people essentially have to auto scoop for, and then release 2 more cards that are essentially the same thing. One of them being, again, much easier to summon than Apoqliphort Towers. So let me know what you guys think. Thank you for watching as always.